Hello, my name is Gina Clifford, and in association with Louise Mowbray, we are in conversation. And we are delighted today to have a special guest with us to have a conversation about living with artificial intelligence, Jane Thomason. Jane is a futurist, a technology futurist, and a global nomad thinking about what's next for ethics and technology and the future. Jane, could you give us a little bit more background about how you got started in technology futurism, and then talk about what you're most excited about around the topic of AI?
No, absolutely. And I, like so many people, are very excited about what AI is going to do. But let me kind of make the connection with how I got involved with technology, because actually most of my life I've had no involvement with technology whatsoever. So I worked for most of my life in healthcare, some of it in Western countries, much of it in emerging economies, and I work right across all aspects of healthcare, from epidemiology, vaccines, women's health, hospitals, and particularly from my background in developing countries, I really understood the constraints that people who are from poor and disadvantaged backgrounds have, their lack of connectivity, their lack of ability to be able to connect with the economy, their lack of bank accounts, their lack of identity, and so forth. And in 2016, it's a roundabout story, but it's what happened. My son came to me and he asked me if I'd actually bought Bitcoin back in 2010 when he told me to. And I hadn't done that. And he was quite cross with me in 2016. And he's going, Mum, now you really have to listen to me, because Bitcoin's built on blockchain and blockchain's going to change everything and you need to learn about it. So it was quite literally that conversation with my son that made me start trying to understand just about that technology, no other ones at the time. But after a while learning about it and thinking about it, I suddenly made that connection, in this case, with how it was going to be really helpful for the disadvantaged, for the poor, the vulnerable, and so forth. And I just went, this is something that could really change the future of the world, do something at scale that I've never been able to do. I really want to be part of this and learn about this. And then from there, of course, it's never one technology, which is the same as what I'll say to you about AI. You start learning about all of the different technologies that come together to enable us to make significant change. And the pace of the development is exponential. So AI, obviously, it kind of burst onto the scene really quickly with ChatGPT, which has forced a lot of people to start thinking about how AI will change the nature of work, but also will enable us in sectors like health and education to do more, to do better, to extend the capabilities of our scarce workforces, to take away boring administrative tasks, to take away boring processing tasks, and really kind of if we treat it, as I always say, AI is like our Man Friday. That's what it can be. It can be this assistant that enables us to do things, better and faster and smarter than we've ever been able to do before. So I think it's super exciting, but I also think it's exciting when you pair it with other things like the metaverse, and you have the AI helping the avatars that are going to be doing all sorts of things in the metaverse, to be able to connect with people and speak with people and educate people.
Wow, that's exciting. I don't know, Louise, do you want to weigh in on kind of what your perspective is on kind of what Jane said about the convergence of these technologies and how they might shape the future? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, without a doubt, that there is a exciting part is the convergence of these technologies. But I think also the other part to it is the exciting part is, how we think about the world, and how we shift our perspective And of course, what always concerns me is that we almost seem to sort of operate in echo chambers where, you know, there's a whole bunch of people who are pretty excited about the possibilities of exponential, I'll just call them exponential technologies, or the convergence of a whole bunch of different things, which creates something else. And what they can do, and just every time I get super excited about the possibilities around that. And we were talking about emerging markets yesterday, Gina, so I just love what you said, Jane, about having that deep insight into, you know, there is this almost kind of given in the Western world of what things look like, and then there's no running water or electricity in other parts of the world. And Gina and I were talking about the fact that, you know, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, we were dumping millions of laptops in Africa and people didn't have the power to run them. So of course, they're all still sitting in boxes and warehouses. So there's, you know, there's kind of always that dichotomy going on for me. And then of course, you know, media sells on fear mongering. I mean, anything that provokes our sympathetic nervous system, you know, ultimately sells or gets the clicks or the likes or the, you know, the advertising revenue to go with it. And we just seem so immensely malleable in that way. And the big question is, what can we do to become more literate around these topics and actually just calm the whole thing down back to the key questions are, you know, what value does it add to my business today, you know, in the near future, in the long term? How do I need to be thinking about people in my business today? And then, you know, and start playing these conversations out. And I'd love to hear, you know, Gina, your thoughts around that. And also, Jane, what do you think people can actually do to become more literate and to get more comfortable? Because AI isn't, you know, a being that has its own will and drive. It's up to us to create AI with other technologies and produce the results that we want. But if we can't imagine futures, then it's tricky to transcend where we are today and where we might be or what we might create. I'll start with you, Gina.
Yeah, I love what you said. It's exactly how I feel about basically keeping people at the center of things as the hype around the metaverse, AI, blockchain, all these technologies heats up and then, you know, dies back down, as you know, Jane has said to us. The thing to keep in mind is that they're not replacing people. It's up to us to decide if these technologies replace us or help accelerate our knowledge, our learning, our agency in the world. And sometimes I think some of the entrepreneurs out there are a bit short-sighted. They think, great, I can, you know, reduce costs by 50%, lay off my workforce, employ these AIs, and I'm gold. But that's so short-sighted, because then quickly you find out that, gee, when something happens, these systems aren't necessarily designed to do the right thing, right? They do the correct thing, but there's not necessarily the right thing, as human ethics would attest. So there's that gap that we haven't accounted for. And I think if you think about things that have happened in the past year with artificial intelligence, there are lots of examples of news that was produced by AI that had facts wrong, and attorneys that used it for case law and found that information was fabricated. So people replaced themselves with these tools, and then they saw the shortfall. And now you have not only replaced a person who could have worked with that AI to make a better product, but now you have reputational damage. So I think, so my takeaway is that these tools are amazing, and the confluence of them are going to be really, really exciting, because they're going to accelerate what we can do even more. But we have to keep people at the center. And Jane, I want to pass it over to you. You know, if you have thoughts or examples to share on maybe some of the short-sightedness that we've seen, and then some of the things that we've gotten right about pulling these technologies together to create something even more powerful.
I think that the issue that we don't want to lose track of is that these technologies are new. They're developing very rapidly, so they're still formative. So we have to expect there's going to be problems, shortcomings, issues to be dealt with. But then I think it's incumbent on us and others to lean in and help highlight what are those issues, whether it's training, AI on biased data sets, or whether it's how you build ethics into the technology stack, or whether it's what are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about that might be unintended consequences of using AI in different ways. So I think that those of us who understand something about the future, and I in no way understand the future at all, but I try and think about it, and I try and think about different technologies and how it's going to be used. So I think we need to be talking to people about it, talking in particular about its utility. And I think this is where technologists kind of fail. They've got some cool piece of tech and they're excited about it, but they don't think about the whole kind of social and political construct of actually getting that technology taken up and being widely used, acceptance, understanding, fears, and all of those things. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. We can't assume immediately that we're going to have AI doing, 80% of the things people do. No, we're going to have to do a kind of managed implementation, if I can say that, but it's going to be fast, and then continuously be picking up problems, addressing them, improving them. And I think we're just in that state of really fast change, but none of us should assume that we've perfected any of it, and we all need to kind of lean in and help shape the future. The only other thing I want to say, because we touched on it before, is particularly, people who are over, and I'm going to say 35, because the 35-year-olds probably grew up playing games. They're going to need a lot of help and a lot of hand-holding to even come to the table, to allay their fears, to admit they don't actually know what a lot of these things are, and, to kind of help them through and understand how it might help. So, an example, I think, AI in healthcare is something that's going to be just a tremendous adjunct to the things that we can now do. So as an example, someone's invented, and it's been approved by the SDA, an AI that can diagnose retinopathy. And so they did a randomized controlled trial in Bangladesh, looking at how that AI could be used to take away a lot of the work that the ophthalmologist used to have to do that don't then require them to do it, which then left the ophthalmologists, who are in scarce supply, to spend more, better quality, higher order time with the patients. And so I think these are the kinds of things, we have a health system that's under threat. We don't have enough health workers. People are burdened by administrative processes and all sorts of other things. So if we can get an AI that can help with diagnosis, or can help with triage, or can do some of the administrative work, why would we not do that? Because we're going to end up with a better system.
Wow, that's powerful, Jane. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great thought. So let's go back to a little bit about where we started the conversation, and you talked about emerging markets and places that maybe get left out of the digital realm that we're talking about here. So what do you think needs to happen to bring the rest of the world in, to have access to these technologies? Or is that already happening? Because we hear every day about the enormous amount of energy required to run something like a ChatGPT query. So how does that look into the emerging world, where people don't have power for their laptops or phones, much less, access to these kinds of tools? Is there something that's happening, or something that we can do to make sure that there's equity for these applications in every part of the world?
Well, look, I actually think that the locus of innovation is going to move from the north to the south, because we're seeing incredible innovation going on, whether it's Africa, India, other parts of Asia. People are embracing it, because remember now, even though there's shortcomings and the infrastructure's poor, 70% of the global population have access to mobile phones. And if you have access to mobile phones, you have access to so much knowledge, information, connectivity, and things that you never had before. And I follow this really closely. And whether it's in supply chains for poor farmers, or financial inclusion for women's cooperatives in Mali, or connecting, farmers and artisans to markets, these things are absolutely happening. And right across Africa, India, other parts of Asia, and at a faster rate in many cases than we see. Because one of the things, there's less barriers to adoption, because if you've got nothing, you're happy to receive something, whereas we're so regulated and we have so many rules and things that, it takes years to, bring a new innovation to market. So I think there's still absolutely a gap in both infrastructure and knowledge. But I think it's not going to be long before, the world makes a resolution through the appropriate UN Council about access to internet being a basic human right, and, pressure being put on governments to provide the basic infrastructure to the people. We have different ways of obtaining energy now. So, for example, people can get small solar panels that are the size of a, kind of a laptop or something, and get enough energy from that to be able to power their mobile phone, power a small light in their houses, and so forth. So I think there's kind of solutions happening. I'm not saying anything's perfect, but it's like everything. We're going to have people who are not in the digital economy in our countries. There'll be people who are not in the digital economy in the developing world, and there'll be some people who never will, because they simply live on the top of some mountain that's never going to get any coverage. But to the extent that we can cover the majority of people, I think that you'll be surprised at the level of uptake and use of different technologies in developing countries. And I gave you that example of Bangladesh because that's going to help these, really underserved health systems to be able to deliver services. But also, if you think of education, because that's another one that I think really is going to offer major change, because you don't need a school with walls and a teacher now to be able to deliver education. And if we can create the opportunity where people do have a mobile phone or an internet connection, they can access metaverse education, whether it's basic education or whether it's skills for the new economy, because I think that's something that's going to be so important, because jobs are changing so rapidly and people need to learn these new skills quickly. And it's not going to come from the universities or the technical colleges. It's got to come from something else. So I think that's the other really big opportunity that will be available to people from developing countries.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that you talked about the flip from the north to the south, innovation, and that people are able to leapfrog because they're not burdened with all this infrastructure. And then you talked about education. And I know, Louise, you and I had a great conversation about education around the world and how it could enhance some of the things that are, bubbling up right now, and how it can help drive that, or the lack of it hinders that. So I don't know if you want to say a few words, Louise, about your perspective on the importance of education as it applies to taking advantage of artificial intelligence, the metaverse, and Web3, and all the other technologies that are yet to come.
Yeah, I'm deeply fascinated and really curious about, what this conversation might look like in 10 years' time, or even a year, because, as you said, Jane, things are, it's the pace and intensity of change that is probably a little discombobulating for a lot of people. And when I think of education, I mean, we talked, we had a great conversation with a professor from Minerva, who, and just sort of, I remember his one comment about the fact that, AI is a brilliant explainer. And that frees up, as you said, Jane, teachers' time or doctors' time or specialists' time to actually connect with human beings. And I know that, I see a doctor in the UK, I've got a 10-minute slot. And how can a doctor even hope to get to unravel the layers of self-diagnosis and actually try and get to the bottom of something in 10 minutes. I mean, it's a really tricky thing to do. So whether we're looking at things like education, where I'm going to just do a broad net of exponential technologies, as we said, James, convergence between a whole bunch of different things. Freeing up teachers to actually teach, to engage, to debate, to get into the whys and the hows and where things apply and what the practical applications are. And I think for me, that is the richest type of education that one can have. I mean, the greatest benefit in education is an understanding. And I was thinking also about, I just happened to be on Richard Branson's site this morning, and he was talking about, of course, neurodivergence and the fact that he's dyslexic. And he wrote an article which was about celebrating, the arrival of AI, because, of course, dyslexic people are brilliant at some of the skills that AI can't do. So, the intuitive sensing, the predictive predictive is maybe not the right word, but the ability to tap into the nuances of what's going on, these innately human capabilities that I think in recent years, a lot of experts have tried to steer us away from, saying they're not that important. The important things are, analytics and what have you, when actually what we bring to the table is this extraordinary capability. And how do we marry neurodivergence with AI or other technologies, where you suddenly have the power of this heightened human capabilities, together with opening doors into things that we just could not reckon or compute as fast or as quickly or as accurately as technology can. So for me, it's a big, beautiful, broad topic. And I'm excited about, I would love to go back to university now and, do 1,000 different topics and have, AI and other technology, AR, VR, ways of actually experiencing and understanding things, and then be able to engage directly with the teacher. And I know, Gina, you mentioned something about large public universities in the US and how you might have 40,000 students in a university, which for me is just mind-blowing. And how, of course, classes are being taught by students, not necessarily professors. And, really it's dishing up information in the hope that we would, if you don't have a great sort of rote memory capability, the chances of surviving that are pretty slim. But what are the possibilities with explainers? And then just to finish this off, I've noticed in emerging economies, we don't need to go through the steps and stages that we go, through the Western world. It's a bit like handing a 1-year-old an iPhone. You don't have to explain how the damn thing works. Literally, they'll figure it out to find their favorite music, or 2-year-old or whatever it might be. A lot of it is so intuitive, and it's built. We're not dealing with clunky typewriters with this much memory, which I remember. We're dealing with things that are much more intuitive, that are designed to get us tapping and clicking. So, great hope there, and really exciting to actually put it to good use. My concern, and I'd love to come back to you around this, Jane, is this age thing. And I'm definitely not an ageist. But I'm just wondering your thoughts about helping people to really get comfortable and get literate. I mean, as you say, it's moving so fast. It's really tricky, even if you're involved in technology. It's difficult to stay on top of all of the different aspects. But how do we help people to become more comfortable with this and start to look at things in a more...
I think there's two aspects to it. Yeah, I think there's two aspects to it. So, I mean, well, three probably. One is, remember, we are not the future. My generation is not the future. So in a way, unless I'm critical to some decision making around technology, I probably don't matter that much. I mean, it's this new generation coming up, Gen Alpha, Gen Z. They're the future. They're the ones that are going to use this. They're the ones that are going to drive it. So I need to say that. But I think the second thing is, now, if I'm a person who's got a need and technology can help solve my problem, I'm much more likely to use it. So, don't go to my mum and say, all this fabulous technology, I'm going to teach you about artificial intelligence, IoT, blockchain. No, but go, listen, actually, if you, then this is a good example with pharmacists. And I'm working with the Social Prescribing Association here in the UK, because they're really interested in how Metaverse can help with pharmacy. But one of the things that they never have enough time to do is spend time with the patients explaining about their medication, how to use it, what are the side effects, and so forth. And this is going to enable my mum to go and talk to, without leaving her home, a human-like avatar who can discuss all her little concerns with her, explain to her how to use her medicine, and make her much more comfortable. So as long as the user experience isn't bad, she's going to go and use that, because she gets really anxious about her medication. And so I think that the second piece is, it's got to have utility and solve a problem the person's got, not sort of making up a problem they don't have, because that's when they'll engage. But the third one, I think, is for the decision makers who don't have the knowledge, or who may be scared and being resistant. And I think that's where we need to get documented use cases that they can see, and they can see this is how we can use it for municipal administration, like they're doing in Seoul, Korea, or this is how we can use it in medicine, or in health and wellness, or in education, or, to give people access to socially isolated people to socialize. And then you give them the examples, and you help them understand how they can get there, then they're going to be far more likely to be open to it.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that, Jane, is when you have technologies that have that broad appeal, and they have a lot of utility for a lot of different people, beyond making the use case, I think go back to the technologies themselves and make them so that you don't have to be a technologist to employ them. So if you're an elderly person and you don't have a lot of technology, even something as simple as an iPhone can be a conundrum. It isn't as simple as we think it is for those that haven't been exposed to a touch interface and even what a password is. So the challenge, I think, is for technology designers to think about their audience and design for them. So even virtual reality, it's an amazing technology, well, technologies, but it still requires a clunky headset. And a lot of people, they might not physically be comfortable wearing it.
I'm going to debate you on that. I need to debate you on that, because I don't think the future of metaverse, virtual reality, augmented reality will be headsets. I think the headsets will be premium for the privileged few, because the reality is, even if they get a bit cheaper, you're not going to get 80% of the world's population in headsets. You're just not. It's too
exactly
hard.
Yeah,
so
that's the point.
I think that the success here will be the people who can create that kind of immersive environment on a mobile phone or a tablet or on a normal internet connection. And just before I spoke to you, actually, I was talking to some guys from Canada, Toronto, who were demonstrating to me simply over the internet what their 3D cityscape could do. And that's enough for most people. So I agree with your point about the problematic nature of headsets, but I would put to you, that's why headsets aren't going to be the major channel for people to access these kinds of virtual and augmented realities.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And I guess what my position was, let's challenge innovators to start thinking beyond the headsets as the end all for that technology, or technologies like that. You have to think about the people that could use it and how they might want to engage with it. And like you said, sometimes a mobile phone is plenty. But yeah, that was my point. And I think you just reinforced it. But thank you, Jane. So I guess, the thing that we talk about all these amazing opportunities and how education fits into this and the possibilities for healthcare and education. Now let's shift a little bit and talk about what do we fear the most about these convergences of technologies, and what could go wrong? What do we need to be aware of?
I'm really happy to answer
Yeah.
that, because this whole issue about ethics and technology is something that I think about a lot and that I talk about a lot, because we need to be thinking about it, because there's a lot of possibilities that can go wrong, but also because we're talking about automation at scale, when they go wrong, they're not just going to impact on one or two people, they're going to impact on hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people with one single algorithmic decision. And so it's really important to think about this right at the beginning when the technology is being built. So I think that's the first thing. But that's a challenge, because developers and engineers are not trained in ethics. They don't even know how to begin to think about it. So there's a whole body of work to be done to try and get these kind of ethical ideas to be built into projects from the start. But if you think about the metaverse, there's so many questions that we have. So we're talking about avatars. Do they have human rights in the metaverse? Are they subject to any law? Are they subject to the law of the outside world? And, how do you uphold the law? How do you protect consumers? How do you protect children? How do you know who children are dealing with? What about physical and mental health impacts of long times in extended reality? So there's a lot of questions there. Even, we talk about privacy and consent with data, although I think we're joking because we gave that up years ago. But it's going to be even worse in the metaverse, because there's going to be so many data points that there'll be more data collected about us than ever before, because the devices will be connected. You'll have the headset, IoT devices, wearables, all sorts of things. And so what I think is, so I always liken it to an analogy of our ancestors discovering fire. On the one hand, it's incredibly exciting. It has all of this potential to be able to enable us as humans to do things we could never do before. But it's frightening and dangerous, and it is. And so they had to learn how to harness fire for good, but how to control it and not be burning people and cities and all of those sorts of things. And that's where I think we are with this technology. We need to harness it for good. We need to understand the downsides, and we need to start getting ahead of that, so that, I've got a list of 10 things that I think we need to be thinking about, in terms of getting ready for the metaverse. Someone needs to be thinking about that and making sure that it gets into the innovations that are going to be licensed and used and accessible to people. It's going to be a work in progress.
Yeah, I think about some of the technologies that are starting to find their way into our bodies, like implants and things. Neuralink is an example. And Louise, I'd like you to weigh in on your thoughts on that as well. Some of these technologies are getting miniaturized. They're getting put into our bodies, and they're connected to the internet. And as the services and the servers and the cloud become better, more capable, more powerful, things can be uploaded and downloaded much more rapidly, much at a higher volume, at a higher rate. If you think about the longer term future, we could have augmentation of our memories and our brains and instant recall of every fact as if it was coming right from our brain, but it's an implant with some data connection. So the scary thing for me is what happens when someone hacks into that. And I know that's been talked about before. It's not a new thing. The Internet of Things has been around for many years now. But what you said about trying to keep up with, ahead of what those downsides could be, sometimes innovators get ahead of the ethics and the legislation. They're creating things that didn't exist yet, and there aren't laws and policies to cover them. And I remember that from the Internet of Things, the early days when baby monitors were being hacked and cars were being hacked. And that probably still happens, but I think now we have a lot more sense of cybersecurity and, you know, what are those things that can happen. But when it's our bodies and it's our life, our health that's at risk, I think we really need to start thinking about, okay, maybe we want these implants in our bodies because from a healthcare perspective, maybe it completely resolves symptoms of disease that there's no cure for and gives us a normal life, or maybe extends our life in some way. But the downside is that it's also vulnerable, just like a computer is vulnerable, especially when we think to the far future and we think about what computers will look like in 50 years. They might be quantum computers, there might be some other technology. And then if we're connected to that, you know, what are the implications for that? And I don't know if you have some deep insights into that or some strong feelings, but then Louise, I would also like your take on that. What do we do about that? How do we manage that? How do we think about that?
Yeah, I just want to ground this in genetics for a moment, you know, our DNA. So willingly, I mean, you know, millions, tens of millions of Americans, you know, did the spit in a tube thing and sent it off to some, you know, a laboratory, which has since been sold. Where is that data? And if you think of the blueprint of life, it's our DNA. And I mean, if you think of the uproar that should have existed at that time, because the future of healthcare definitely lies in the connection with understanding DNA, epigenetics, and everything else that goes with it. So when we think of implants, and I think of Neuralink, and of course, they've been FDA approved for human trials. And then, of course, you know, the headlines popping that the monkeys haven't done so well in the laboratories, which I couldn't even bear to read, so I didn't climb into it. But, you know, fantastic for people who have MS, amazing. If I think of Stephen Hawking and Hawkins and his ability to communicate via a screen. I mean, Stanford, I think, have just produced the fastest response in that kind of interface. Brain-computer interfaces are here. We will have them in our schools, in our training rooms, in our workshops very soon, mostly non-invasive. But certainly the other end of it, you know, the invasive side of things, you're absolutely spot on, Gina. That's, you know, without a doubt. And the sci-fi end of it is that we'll be able to download information directly to our brains. So, you know, it depends how much you want to terrify yourself today, or, you know, or not. But what's possible? Well, I'm not sure that there's no stopping point with what's possible. I think, if anything, our ability to now interact, of course, AI has been around for a long time. Our ability, our fascination with being able to interact in real time with something that really is just, you know, reliant on a data set. And as you said, Jane, you know, it depends on what was contained in that data set. And most people's data sets are definitely not clean and questionable in terms of how they've been trained. And the determination, as we were discussing yesterday, Gina, to actually clean up those data sets. And I've often wondered, you know, why can't somebody just write some AI or create some AI that, you know, figures out the bias and extracts it, and on we go. But apparently it's not as simple as that. So I think all of our questions, all of our fears, anything that is an unknown and is complex produces a stress response, an acute stress response. And there's some brilliant studies to show this. And what happens in an acute stress response is we shut down half of the brain chemicals that actually enable us to think more exponentially, more expansively about things. So, you know, this question of, if we're unsure about how we can add value and mitigate some of the things that are bound to come, cybersecurity for sure. I mean, if you want to get involved in a sector that ain't going to die, it's cybersecurity. And I saw a woman in Congress yesterday, I think it was on the news this morning, talking about the fact that a voice had been cloned, and I didn't pick up the whole story, whose voice had been cloned, saying, oh, her daughter's voice had been cloned. And she got a call saying, if you don't get in the car and bring us this amount of money, immediately your daughter will be drugged and, you know, shipped all over the world and terrible things. And through a series of conversations, she figured out her daughter was quite safe at home on her, you know, and her husband was contacted and everything was fine, but it was just the cloning of the voice. So if we just think of simple things like that, would we clone our own voices for our own uses? Probably quite happily. I mean, I quite happily set up a course with my cloned voice, and rather than me having to re-record time and time again. But at the same time, that opens me up to security systems that have yet to be developed. And as you said, Jane, I mean, you know, sort of that analogy around fire is just perfect. I mean, the way I think about AIs at the moment is they're like toddlers running around bumping into everything. You know, as you said, they haven't, you know, nothing's been around for very long. It hasn't been tested. It's not scalable yet. And just because we're seeing a lot of investment into various different AIs and exponential technologies doesn't mean that they have any longevity, as we know. So yeah, you've sparked up 50 things in my mind, and I'm going in 1,000 different directions. But just to come back to the fear-based scenario, I think we have agency. We have agency to get literate. You know, I always think of these things as whether we're afraid or not, this will keep happening. And the question is, what is my circle of influence? What can I do to ensure that I understand as much as I possibly can, that I look at things with a sense of personal responsibility. So responsibility to self and for others. I mean, kind of two parts to that. And that every single step of the way, I bring it back to the impact on people. And as you said, Jane, it's not just my direct impact, but what are the second degree consequences, third degree? And of course, we haven't, you know, unintended consequences are unintended. Every exponential leap, any discovery, any innovation has created, and just think of plastics, you know, I think of 50s and the 60s, everybody embraced plastics, you know, they conserved our natural resources, glass and earthenware, and you know, we had these, but no one could have predicted how much single-use plastic we might use, and the fact that 14 tons are going into the ocean every month. So there will always be unintended consequences, but insofar as we can mitigate it as much as possible, I think the responsibility has to lie with each and every one of us. What do we want this world to be like? What do we want to create? And then do the very best that we can to make sure that we're in action of that. And maybe that sounds a little Pollyanna-ish, but fundamentally.
No, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you, because we can all do something. You know, within the limits and the boundaries of who we are and what we are and who we can influence. But, you know, I think at the very least, as you said, for yourself, for your children, for your families, we all need to be thinking about this and engaging and trying to influence as much as we can. I do want to sort of come back to where we started, because I was thinking when you were speaking, yes, like we're doing unknown things, having implants and interfaces and so forth, but you know, we're the most vaccinated generation ever in human history. We let people shove these vaccines into us and we're never quite sure what's going to happen, you know, and the theory is that it's going to have a positive impact on the population, so we all do it. And then similarly, you know, much of medical science has been around experimentation. You know, the first heart transplants probably didn't go that well, but they paved the way, you know, for our ability now to be able to do them relatively routinely. So I think it's not that different from, I mean, I know we've got technology hooking in, but we're basically trying to push the boundaries of science for a good reason. And I think there is experimentation and there's some level of risk. But, you know, I don't think that's not a reason to do it, but I think it is a reason to carefully monitor, evaluate, document, and then make sure that we're alert to where the problems are.
I think that's a great segue into what we would like to see for the future. So we talked about what we were excited about, what we're afraid of. So advance us 10, 20 years, maybe longer into the future, and imagine what the culmination of some technologies could enable for our lives, and paint a vision for that. I mean, for me, we talked about education, we talked about healthcare, we talked about the underserved populations, and sometimes technology leaves them behind. And you, Jane, mentioned that we might need some handholding for anyone over 35 to in workforce and beyond. And I'd like to think that some technologies will actually help with that. So, you might get a PhD completely through the metaverse instead of having to go to a campus or be, on site at a job. But that's already it's already possible. But I don't know that that's widespread. But then you have artificial intelligence as a smart assistant that coaches you, which that's already in existence now. But everyone has it, right? Elderly people have it. It reminds them when they need to take their medication, and it maybe it's connected to your implants, and it knows that you've missed your medication or you've taken too much and alerted somebody. So like all of these really intelligent systems connected that are monitoring us in the background and helping us live a better life on our terms. And it's customizable, it's personalized, all the things that in my mind make life with technology pleasurable and not fearful. We're not talking about people being replaced by anything. These are things that augment ourselves, augments our lives and our work and our health, our education, every aspect of our lives. I mean, in a big, broad sense, that's how I would like to see it. But I want to turn it over to you, Jane, and your thoughts on that, what you would like to see, and then Louise.
Well, I'm not going to tell you about what I'd like to see, but I want to put a proposition to you that we should be thinking about. So there's a spectrum of views about whether technology will take our jobs or not, and whether people will lose their jobs. And what I want us to think about is, what if it does? And then remember that actually jobs was something that really came with the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, people didn't have jobs. If you were wealthy, you did whatever you wanted. If you were poor, you were looked after by someone who was wealthy, and you did things, but it wasn't called a job. Then we all went to the city. We had the Industrial Revolution. We started to have jobs. And then we just started to define ourselves through our jobs. So that's where our identity comes from now. And then plus we got paid through our jobs. But if you're kind of projecting into the future, maybe we won't have jobs. Maybe we'll have universal basic income. My question is then, what do we do? Is it going to be this new renaissance where we all become these self-actualized thinking people who are being creative and doing amazing things? I think that's the question. How do we find meaning if it was so that technology really meant that very few of us had to actually do jobs anymore? What are we going to do? I think that doesn't even answer your question one bit, but I think we should be thinking about it.
That's a great point. And it's something that Louise and I had talked about with other guests in conversation. And depending on your perspective on it, it's either glorious or it's terrible. But I don't want to give my opinion because I want to turn it over to Louise and get your thoughts.
Very
Louise.
interesting. I think purpose and meaning are overhyped. I mean, forgive me, I'm just going to take a stab at that, because actually the key, so many people don't know, as you say, Jane, how do we discover, this sort of essence of life if we haven't discovered it already? However, if we perhaps look at life through the lens of flow, where we are completely and utterly absorbed in something, what emerges out of that, the amazing brain chemicals that make us feel fantastic, kind of supersede this sort of need, this drive to have this sort of purpose and meaning that that we might find through our identities and our roles. But I think something happened during the pandemic as well. I think we've had a little taste of that experience where you talked about the Industrial Revolution, Jane, and I always think machine metaphor, where human beings became parts of the system, cost center, and of course, people, were awarded a gold watch after 40 years or whatever it might be. And, today we shake our heads, just thinking how unimaginably, jail-like that feels. And yet I don't think we realize the hustle, grit and grind kind of cultures that we were stuck in before everything became untethered with the pandemic. So our expectations of our organizations to provide the security to make decent decisions, our organizations, our leaders, our community leaders to actually lead us in the right direction where no one actually had an answer. There was nothing we could extrapolate from the past to give us any indication of what the future may be. Any previous diseases were not in this context. And I think for a lot of people that became untethered, and it led to all sorts of global movements, which we saw: great migration, great resignation, quiet quitting, which certainly isn't a new thing. But of course, beautiful thing about memes is they take on a life of their own and they just run. And so the sort of clawing back of organizations to try and pull us back into that captured culture, that untethering of identity, where we've actually had to dig in and figure out, okay, purpose and meaning for a lot of people. I mean, it's a little, but for a lot of people who can't find that, just look for flow and you'll get there, kind of thing. But reconnecting to who am I? What do I stand for? What's important to me? What gives me a sense of purpose and meaning, satisfaction, flow, engagement, whatever you want to call it. And suddenly we've got a whole different unraveling of the ties that bind us. And we're at the very beginning of an era that is yet to be defined. We don't know how that's going to pan out. So I loved your question, Jane. Universal basic income. I mean, I just hope I live long enough for that. I've got a few ideas about what I'll be doing all day. And if I don't, I hope I come back into a lifetime that's full of that. So yeah, over to you, Gina. What does that look like for you?
I mean, I think ultimately what Jane mentioned is near and dear to my heart, because as you said, during the pandemic, for me, it was very personal, and made an impact on the future decisions that I've made about my career, about my life, about balance and the importance of connecting with people outside of a job and having the freedom to decide when and where I work and with whom. And it was something that I aspire to do more and more of, to be more autonomous about the future of my career and my family and my well-being. And I think if we can not work 70 hours a week, right, or even 50 hours a week, or even 40, but maybe work for us in the future is not measured by hours, but passion projects that we want to lean into. And whether there's a basic income or not, the economy is such that we can afford to live a pleasurable life, with good health and security, without having to work many, many hours and to be stressed to no end about deadlines. And work becomes something that's around our passions, and we lean into it. And the more we lean into it, the more value we get from it, the more income we get from it. So it isn't measured, in my world, it isn't measured by hours, and it isn't measured by things that we currently think about as bringing value. It might be we're moving the needle for somebody and there's value in that. And that is up to me and the people that I'm working with to decide what that looks like value-wise to me and to others. So it isn't like, oh, we can only afford whatever that amount of money is. I think it could completely reshape how we get paid, if that's the right word to use. And maybe there's more bartering for services and shifting of the way we get paid. Maybe it isn't even in financial terms that we think of now. Maybe it is in terms of things that we get for free, services that we get for doing a job or some work that we're leaning into, beyond what we can even imagine today. And so it isn't just about a salary, right? It's about, think about all the things that you need to live in your life and how you could get those by leaning into some work that you are passionate about. And so maybe the salary that you actually need is rather small. So I don't know, that's my perfect version of how I would like to live into that future. But I want to pass it over to Jane, because of course she could completely change my vision with some insights.
No, but I think you touch on something really important, and this is a problem with our economic system that became grossly apparent during the pandemic, which was it's based on the pursuit of profit and return to shareholders. It doesn't look after people and it doesn't look after the planet. And I think that's my big takeaway from the pandemic. We got it wrong. But to your point, which is talking about how we value and how we reward things and what we reward, I think that what you're talking about is a move to a future where it's simply not about money and profits. It's about a much more balanced society where we're looking after each other and we're looking after our needs and we're looking after keeping the planet a great place for us to continue to be. And so I just think we really do need that kind of rebalancing. And I can't not mention one of the blockchain projects that I'm quite fond of, which is around the care economy. And they're actually creating a token economy about rewarding carers and acts of caring. And I do think we have certain capabilities with technology now and tokenization and the creation of these virtual economies to be able to unite people around a sense of purpose, whether it's about caring or whether it's about the planet or whether it's about something else. So I think we've got some new affordances that technologies give us to be able to dream about what you're saying and actually create an economy within a world that can do that. And so I think that's super exciting. We can do things in the future we've never been able to do before, and it's up to us to try.
Oh, yeah. I think we could end it there, because you have an amazing insight, Jane. That was some wisdom there. Louise, do you have anything you want to add before we close?
Yeah, just that it's been a fabulous conversation. Jane, you triggered a little light bulb in my mind about the fact that care ethics are a relatively new branch of philosophy, and I think that really came into was spotlighted during the pandemic. I mean, it's always been around. It's been problematic because a lot of people's lives are tied into giving care without any remuneration or relief. And the other thing I've just got to throw in there is that, every time we sit down with a group of people, we've got to look around and say, well, 38% of people that I'm with here are reporting symptoms of burnout, and 50% are reporting symptoms of mental health issues. And so whatever, this liminal space, this messy middle that we're in, I think the determination to emerge out of that in a healthier way that's better, as you said, Jane, and you said, Gina, for people, planet, and yes, profit, of course. We need to oil the wheels of, I guess for me, that's conscious capitalism. But without this planet, we cannot continue on the notion of endless extraction from a finite planet. It's just as simple as that. And I put a lot of hope into this sort of new wave of new thinking through young people shifting into more decision-making and leadership roles. And I often laugh because, you know, everybody says, oh, you know, the snowflakes and wafty and what do they know? And everybody wants to fix the world and make it a better place. And I'm like, thank goodness, because we absolutely need that drive, that determination from young people today. And, you know, I'm happy to play my part, whatever that looks like. Jane, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and hearing your perspective. And Gina, thank you as ever. Really amazing insight.
Thank you. And thank you,
Thank
Jane.
you for a wonderful conversation. Thank you. Bye.